Welcome to Conversations with Entrepreneurs. This is our second event, our December 2020 event, the last of 2020, a dismal year for some, but perhaps it's been a marvelous year for the virtual reality community. Maybe we'll find out a little bit later on. You will see within the Zoom meeting room that we're using that chat is open, and you are very strongly encouraged to make your presence known within chat. Introduce yourselves to each other, start working on collaborations, understanding where you've each come from and what you're doing, why you're interested in today and what you might end up doing together after the session. We also have Q&A open. Could you please reserve that for your questions? So the main feast that we have for you this afternoon is, as the title suggests, an interview by an entrepreneur of an entrepreneur. And your interviewer and interviewee will be introduced very shortly. Listen intently. Any questions you've got, poke them to us through Q&A, and they will be filtered by myself and by John Holmes, your hosts. We have pressed the big record button today, so you're on candid camera, we are on candid camera, and your questions and your chat are on candid camera as well. So please be aware of that whilst you're busy publishing your comments. And without further ado, I'll hand off to John. Let's meet our interviewee and interviewer.
Thank you, David. Well, today we have entrepreneur, deal maker on the UK government entrepreneur programme, and innovation specialist providing advice and consultancy to a wide range of bodies. Tim Luft has a few strings to his bow. So with a background in innovation and IT programming, Tim started a VR company in 2015, right here in the West Midlands. And since that time, he's grown that company to provide specialist VR training products for major clients. And he's had quite significant growth in the company, especially over recent years. And one of the most interesting things about his journey is how his company has joined a network and how his role has changed and evolved as part of that. So we're really hoping to hear more about that really fascinating journey today. Interviewing Tim is Tim Luft. Interviewing Tim is Joel Blake OBE. So a seasoned entrepreneur in his own right, of course, founder of fintech company, GFA Exchange, a president of the Commonwealth Chamber of Commerce, a director of Birmingham Tech Week. I think Joel is probably known to most, if not all of you, and perfectly qualified to be our interviewer of the day and guide us through the process. So over to you.
Well, thank you very much, John, David, and welcome to everyone on the call. This conversation is going to be fascinating. I'm really looking forward to getting under the skin of entrepreneurship and technology and all its wonderful, wonderful combinations with the sensational Tim Luft. I know, Tim, you're a man of great experience, so welcome. I hope you're well. How have you been, in this challenging year?
No, thanks, Joel. It's great to meet you, and we speak again. We spoke on a panel not so long ago. And thank you very much, John, David, and everybody for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. And touch wood, all is well with a couple of days to go till the Christmas holidays.
Absolutely. What a welcome but somber break I think we're all going to have. But I think, one thing we could all say from this year, that it's certainly been a time of change and a time of disruption for us all. But disruption is something that is not new to you, Tim, in terms of your world of work. And, John gave a really great insight into the real mix, entrepreneur, deal maker, policy, activity, social impact, so many different strings to your bow. What really drives you? That's the opening question for me, is like, what really drives you and what's taking you to all those different spaces?
I think the commonality between everything, and it probably is too much, I'm doing this and that, but what really drives me, I think, and brings it all together is that passion for technology, for a force for good. I'm a true believer in tech. I mean, I've been into tech all my life. I went to university and I was in Birmingham actually, and I focused on technology and design and architecture and 3D. But as a kid, I was there at the age, and I'm sure a lot of people remember the BBC Micros and the early stage computers. And from playing games as a kid on a most basic machine to now putting on the VR headset and being exported into a completely different world has been a fascinating journey. And I really believe technology is such a good enabler. Yes, there's good and bad ways to use technology, but I think as a country and as companies, if we adopt technology in the right way, this is how we're going to grow. This is how we're going to get through what's going to be undoubtedly a very tough time in our economic development. But it's that passion for technology and the disruptive element that you talked about, Joel. 100%. You know, I think Airbnb. I don't know if you were lucky enough to buy shares in that when they first came out. If you did, you're a very rich man now because they doubled in value. I'm sure you have, Joel. I'm sure you did well out of that one. But here's a company that owns no property. It's a tech business, but it owns no buildings. It owns no bricks and mortar. It's a company that spun out of San Francisco for two students who had a simple idea and they wanted to disrupt the market and they wanted people to come to festivals. So they used blow up beds and rented them out for £5 and $5 a night, hence Airbnb. Now look at the company, each of those founders is worth 11 billion. I mean, I just think these are great stories and I'd love to see that happen in the Midlands.
I mean, would that not be a really fantastic story for our region, as you say, because, you know, some of the biggest innovations in the world that we all know and love, you know, the Airbnbs, the Facebooks, the Googles of the world have all started from very, very simple ideas, very, very niche ideas that have grown over time. And I think as entrepreneurs, often we can get sucked into the grandeur of our dreams and forget the simplicity of our businesses. And, you know, you mentioned technology being an enablement tool for that. I mean, what do you think of some of the, I guess, I mean, in particular, in your niche of VR and technology, what have you seen happening in terms of almost sub-niches within that space? Because I think the more granular you can get is the more opportunity, but what have you seen in your space?
I think this year's been a fascinating year for VR. I mean, I know it's been a really tough year for a lot of industries, hospitality, transportation, airlines, but for tech, it's been actually a phenomenal year. They won't admit it. you get a games company to tech, but I'll tell you what, the games industry has done very well this year. I can assure you of that. And actually what it's done, it's forced us to use technology in a way we've never done before. Here we are having this call in Zoom. We wouldn't have dreamed to do this a year or so ago. Now it's the norm. And I think what you'll see when it comes to VR, you know, Oculus brought out a product called the Oculus Quest 2. The VR headset earlier this year. It was sold out within weeks because the penetration and that many people wanted to buy it. Now, to get that level of, that's never happened before, but we're at home, people have got more time and they want to engage in tech. What that's done is opened up avenues for tech that just weren't there, you know, and fascinating. When you look at those probably 3 areas in the Midlands specifically, you know, I've seen tech being used at the NHS hospitals in Coventry and Warwickshire, using VR to help young people suffering with stress and anxiety because of lockdown, you know, which is a great use of the use of mental health and well-being using VR. I've seen VR now being used for physiotherapists in Shropshire to save people who can't physically get to an appointment. They can put their headset on and do the exercises and routines and track. You know, I've seen VR being used not just in health. I think we've seen universities. University of Wolverhampton, I read their open days are all done in 360. So you put a VR headset on instantly because the students can't get to the campus. By doing it in VR, they can experience what that campus looks like. And finally, I've seen companies such as National Nuclear Laboratory putting out tenders this year for virtual exhibitions because they can't bring people to the sites anymore. It's all done virtually and they want people to engage and join in a VR environment. So I've never seen so much opportunity and growth in VR as it has been this year, but obviously that's driven through what has fundamentally been a terrible, terrible year, but it needs drive necessity, which drives innovation. And that's where you tend to see these opportunities come out. And I think, you know, it puts the Midlands in what I think is a pretty strong position. You know, we've got a very good skill base in this tech. You know, we've got that games industry out of Leamington Spa that has really grown. We've got universities with really good quality skills that with graduates who can actually support this industry. So I'm very bullish going forward. I think we've got a great base to grow the sector.
I mean, you said something there which is really, really powerful there, that sense of needs drives necessity drives innovation. And I think you're absolutely right. I think this year more than ever before, we've all been forced to think about what's really necessary in our businesses, in our organizations, but also what does that mean for the future? Because there is no blueprint for what normal looks like moving forward. And I'll certainly, in my space of fintech, I've certainly seen more people now having to think about and getting more confident about creating their own sense of their own future, not following norms, not following the protocols of the industry, you know, seeking out new ways of being the outlier and being the rebel as an organization in their approach. But I guess one of the things that I've also seen challenging for many organizations is the adoption of this change. In particular in industries like, you know, professional financial services industries, but other industries as well, where the force of change has been such that there is no going back. So how from your experience, have you seen organizations being willing to adopt and embrace such disruption? And have you got any examples of how they've been able to do that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're absolutely right, Joel. I think your sector, the fintech, is probably one of the driving forces for disruptive change, because it was such a traditional sector, and there's so much change in that area now, from these online banks to fintech to cryptocurrency, blockchain. I mean, amazing change in that sector and innovation that we see, and that one hopes that following Brexit, either way, fintech will remain one of the key driving forces of the UK industry, because I think it's where we can add value, and across the whole of Europe, actually, the UK is the fundamental place to do that. In our own sector, we've seen change, maybe not to the extent that you guys have seen in fintech, but you take a traditional market of ours, and I can speak from my own experience. You know, we've worked with police forces as a good example. Now, police predominantly train people and have done in a very traditional way. You know, they're training them in training rooms, training centres, one-to-one, bring in a teacher, 15 people in front of a screen. COVID stopped that. You know, COVID, you can't bring 15, 20 people in the room together to train. You can't, you know, you've got people working from home. And actually, what was quite refreshing was to see an organisation such as a police force, which is I don't know if there's any police men or ladies on the call, but it's quite a traditional way of doing business. To actually say, actually, we're going to start delivering this in VR. We're going to actually do for our new recruits, let's give them a VR headset and do stop and search training, domestic violence training. Let's start looking at forensic crime assessment scenes, pushing out legislation. Let's put it in a VR headset and train people in that way. And that, to me, is a massive, you know, I mean, it might not sound it to you guys who adopt tech all the time, but to a policeman in his 50s who's never used tech before to that extent, to suddenly put a VR headset on and be dropped into an immersive environment, real innovation, real disruption. So when you start seeing more traditional industries like that adopt tech, and you just see where the opportunity is to go forward. And I think, you know, you'll see bits of that now in every sector, you know, manufacturing through to, you know, and actually in manufacturing, give you a very quick example of this. I haven't got shares in Apple or anything like that, but Apple, you know, Apple fundamentally changes the way we as a nation adopt tech. There's no question. You know, I know when Steve Jobs brought out the iPad, there was no product like the iPad. You know, all his advice, it's a complete waste of money. No one's going to buy it. No one's got a reason to use this product. He pushed it through. It came out. It's the biggest selling piece of IT hardware, I think, ever in the history of the world. And people found a use for that. Now, Apple is supposed to be bringing out their augmented reality glasses next year. You know, when products like this come out on the market, they're going to have such a disruptive a way that industry works. Because if you think back, when I was at university, you know, Apple, the computer you had at university was far better than any computer I had at home. Apple changed that. Suddenly, I've got a computer at home that's better than what I'm using at the office. So it forces industry to, we've got to adapt this. Apple's going to do the same with AR as Oculus and Facebook have done with VR. So I think when you watch, if you say, where's the disruption going to be in manufacturing? Manufacturing are really pushing down the AR route. You've got companies like Rolls-Royce in Birmingham, you've got Jaguar Land Rover in Wolverhampton, you've got aerospace companies such as and tier 2 manufacturers in Telford. They're using AR already. They're using AR to do predictive maintenance systems, to do training, to do operational. They're replacing traditional bits of paper and card with AR platforms to track and operate machinery. when glasses come out and that takes it away from a tablet onto a pair of glasses, I think that's going to really shoot up. So my one to watch for next year is Apple as those products come out into the market, but great opportunities to disrupt just about every sector, I think.
And so, those are on the call, please do keep your questions coming through. And, I think what Tim has really highlighted there is the real connection between the adoption, the need to adopt, and the ability to have a use to adopt it for. Because even if you know you need to adopt it, it's to get that buy-in and to get people on board, there has to be a very clear use case that people are willing to get behind and see through. And I think that's clear for all traditional sectors and non-traditional sectors too. I think, one thing I've certainly seen from this year is that if we're not going to be adaptable to change, change will change us more than we could ever expect. I think historically, you can almost plan for change and have a strategy in place. I think COVID has shown that the rules have completely changed around that. And I think therein lies the opportunity.
I agree.
But I think one of the things you mentioned at the very beginning was your passion and your drive for social inclusion and social impact and how technology plays a part in that. I mean, what have you seen from this year again in terms of maybe some examples of how social inclusion has gone up on the agenda of organizations through the use of technology? I know you mentioned NHS earlier in some of the things that you said, but have you got any other examples of where social good has become almost equal to commercial impact?
So interesting enough, and it's something I followed, and I think it's a great example of how technology can be used to trade. Obviously, early on in this year, it's been a tremendous year, bizarre year for all sorts of areas. You take the US, they've been through real ups and downs this year, and they had the real serious, and terrible scenes we saw with Black Lives Matter. What I've seen since in the UK, I've seen companies that have developed diversity training in VR that actually put people in the head of somebody who's been objected to unconscious bias to help them understand what it's like to be in that position. And having had to go at some of these myself, I'm absolutely blown away by the quality of some of the stuff and how you can use technology to do that. I think is real, and it's a commercial product. These are commercial products that people are selling. So number one, I think definitely I've seen real use cases in using technology for good in this way. But the other areas, the area that Joel, you and I have discussed before, and I'm fascinated about this, and it's an area I'm learning about every day. It's not an area I had a massive amount of expertise, but it's the esports agenda. I heard Andy Street, the Mayor of Birmingham, say not early this year that we'd love Birmingham. We've got the Commonwealth Games coming up in a couple of years' time. Why shouldn't we be the home of esports? If there was one industry that pulls young people together, no matter what culture, creed, religion, it's games. I'm talking about games, not gaming. It's slightly different. but computer games, esports. And could we do more as a Midlands region to say, well, why don't we become that real hub of esports? Why don't we get communities together? Football teams are starting to do it. I saw Wolves have got their own esports arena now. I've seen new esports pop up in different locations around the Midlands. And I think that looking at the growth and success of the game industry this year during lockdown and the way that young people were engaged, maybe esports has got a real opportunity for us going forward as well. So and I know you and I have spoken about this, Joel, but I just think there's something in that I'd love to explore more.
Absolutely, and I'm completely behind what we could do that and Andy's kind of desire for the region to be there. And I think it's certainly something that would add value to all of us as a region, because I think it plays into a number of our key strengths in the region. In terms of our youth profile, our demographic profile, our tech sector, and I think the innovation that's coming within the support business areas and sectors around those type of drivers. So, if you look at innovation in professional services, for example, if you're looking at the way in which wider communities have identified what value they bring more than ever before, and are now beginning to be integrated within some of the more mainstream support services who traditionally wouldn't have recognized the social value that they bring. I think all that plays to a new narrative for the region. And certainly with my kind of president of Commonwealth Chamber hat on, what we've seen internationally is the opportunity for all the eyeballs that will be on the region, the opportunity for us to really control that narrative in a new way. And so you're right, sports is a real opportunity to really aggregate some of those pillars and some of those opportunities. And certainly I think for me, and I know you do in terms of your work, social inclusion is going to become a real strong case for our region in terms of why people should invest in us as a region, separate from the sector specialisms and strength that we do have. Which does lead me on to another question in terms of how technology has impacted on the world of business this year from a viewpoint of pivoting. I've seen a number of organizations this year be forced to change the way they work in terms of their business models, their target markets, their purpose, their vision, etc. Well, what are your views on pivoting this year? Have you seen any major examples of real significant pivoting that has created almost international opportunities for some of our businesses in the region?
It's interesting, isn't it? I think it may be a little early because a lot of big companies are like big ships, aren't they? It takes them a long time to change direction, and they'll react. They are reactive, and they'll react to obviously COVID, and we all ended up working from home. And I suppose the number one change was Zoom and all these virtual meetings. I mean, suddenly out of nowhere, there's about 5 different companies offering that support, that service. And I think companies, that was a relatively easy thing for companies to adopt pretty quickly, and we saw that change. I think you've got a lot more. I've sort of been keeping half an eye on the chat, and there was one question mentioned about virtual exhibitions and virtual conferences. Is it quite there yet? You know, is it? And I think that's a worry about a lot of companies. Actually, the technology's there, whether culturally we as a group of people and staff and employees of a business are quite ready to adopt it in the way that we can run full virtual events or go to a virtual conference or go to a virtual exhibition and engage in that in the way we would in a real one, it is yet to be seen. Having said all that, I'll give you an example of where I've actually put some of our own money into as a big pivot. So I was lucky enough in January last year to go to a big exhibition in the US called CES. It's a big electronics show in Las Vegas every January, and it's great. You know, it's a spectacle. It's hard work, Joel. It's not all about travel, but it's a spectacle to go to with 250,000 visitors.
Wow,
now,
okay.
This year they made a decision very quickly, and I think the US are pretty good at this. It's not going to happen in January. We're going to go virtual. But they didn't just say we're going to do a virtual exhibition, and they put a lot of money, a lot of effort, and there's a whole CES virtual exhibition, multiple halls, multiple rooms, ability for me to have a virtual 3D stand. I can actually pay $8,000 and have it really jazzed up, look like a real stand. I can have booking one-to-one meetings with clients. I can actually link that to the British Embassy if I want to. I can get people. I can do pinpoint advertising to people. So much so that their footfall they're talking about is going to be almost 40% of the real footfall. That's phenomenal. If they can get 40% footfall in a virtual exhibition compared to the real, yet to see. I'll tell you if that happens in February. But that's what they're telling me at the moment. So when you've got big organisations that have been absolutely hit by change like this, and you know, actually they've had to pivot. They're not a big corporate that can give it a couple of years and see how long it takes. We changed our business model overnight, and we've created this environment, and I think that's great to see. So when we start to see organizations like CES change the way they do business, I think smaller businesses look at it and think, actually, you know, why don't we jump on this at a smaller scale? And even you guys Chamber of Commerce, my local chamber, I'm a member of Shropshire Chamber. I've been living over in Shropshire, started a business up here. You know, these guys have invested in virtual exhibition, virtual meeting technology that's a little bit more interactive than the norm, and I think that's great. So you are seeing change to happen in certain circumstances forced by necessity, and that's always a way. And it's the same with my business actually, in terms of when I set the company up. People say, why do you use VR? You know, why wouldn't we just go out there and do it for real, or do it? And where VR absolutely works the best is where it's either highly expensive to do for real, so there's a real commercial reason to do it, or it's heavily dangerous, so health and safety, setting a fire on a oil and gas rig, or highly risk to do, so evacuating trains and aircraft. And so when VR first kicked off in industry, it was all the compliance training, the fire safety, the health and safety, the evacuation, the emergencies. These were the areas that were bought first, because they were the obvious business case. People accept that, they do it, they enjoy it, they find it's actually a really worthwhile. I was sitting on the train in February before we all stopped traveling by train, and I had two ladies talking, and they were from Barclays Bank, and she pulled out a handbag, a VR headset, and said, "Look, Barclays have sent me a VR headset for my induction." So, and she was saying, "What do you mean?" Well, I haven't got to go anywhere. I go home, I put this on tonight, and all my induction is done in VR, and then I have to bring the headset back when I start work on Monday. I thought, wow, how innovative is that? Barclays doing induction in VR. So these little bits have been great to see. Great to see.
And I think that notion of change is so key. And you mentioned change in your organization in being, if I believe, the part of the Martin James group, I believe it is. How was that change for you in joining a bigger ecosystem and being able to add value in there? How was that for your organization?
Yeah, it's been a fascinating. So we're from Shropshire to Birmingham, so we're next door to you guys. The Martin, it's been an absolute pleasure, really. So Martin James is run by Jim and his wife Ahab, who sort of run the whole network, and they call it a network. So Martin James Network, which is I was just chatting to the guys about this just before we started. It's quite a distinction in a way that as a network, instead of one large group, what they tend to do is support lots and lots of individual businesses who all form this network. And what's been really clever about this and innovative, and I think it's a model that's got real legs, is as an organization that joins that network, you have this shared entrepreneurial atmosphere around you, and you share the service. So you've got centralized legal, finance, you've got centralized PR, marketing, you've got support for tech, etc. But then gives you the time to focus on the innovation and the business around you. But I've watched entrepreneurs come in, and actually the example I gave you, the unconscious bias product, that was somebody who came in to Martin James, I think probably middle of the summer, with an idea and said, "Look, I've got this idea, but I've no idea how to make it happen, and I'd love to do the call. Can we do?" And just as an observer from the outside, to see an individual come in, welcome into the team. Look, here's a business, here's some legal support, here's a company, here's the accountancy, here's a finance, here's a sales staff, here's an office, here's a tech, here's your product, off you go. And within 3 months, he's taken that business from a concept to a full-blown product for diversity training that he's rolling out with already and commercially looking to sell, and actually now getting buyers, getting traction. And which has been great to see. And that I've never known an organization work at that pace. I think the private sector are pretty good at that. When you get, they can, when you get the opportunity like that network really works at that pace, which is great. So yeah, at the moment, I think that those models, we can learn a lot from that. It's a great idea.
Absolutely, and just as you were talking, I was just reflecting on that idea of a shared services model. That kind of, I think in pictures, and I was thinking this kind of hub and spoke approach. All these different organizations all connected together in one, metaphorical wheel, if you like. And I think, in all that you said today, in terms of having a real clear purpose, that's driven what you're doing in terms of that social impact, the ability to adapt to change because out of necessity, but the ability to do that with action because you have a use for it. And then what you're then saying there in terms of connecting to a network where you not feel alone with those decisions as well. It strikes me that that's almost a blueprint of how businesses can begin to think about moving forward into the new year. You're not isolated. You can go out there and create these ideas. You can get the support to keep moving forward, but you've got to have the confidence also and the willingness to take those actions. And it's difficult for many when, particularly coming from traditional industries or cultures where, you're forced to do it. And, it's like when you're a kid and your mom tells you to go and do something and you don't want to do it, but if you don't do it, the repercussions are going to be worse. So you better just get it done. Maybe that's the world that we're living in now, right? But I think, I guess in summing up, I think one thing I've taken from today, Tim, is the importance of being willing just to step outside your comfort zone, forced or otherwise, but doing it in a manner where you're supported, and do it in a manner where you're not forgetting your purpose behind doing it. And I think that's kind of a thing to maybe consider moving forward for us all. So I guess in closing, Tim, and just kind of thinking about Christmas is on the way, and then a new year, and we still don't have clarity on what this new world's going to look like, but we're all going to be a part of it. What advice would you give, or what would be your kind of insight for those who may be on the call today who are thinking about this adoption and change and getting into 21 with a kind of a new refreshed view on the world? What would be your kind of insights or advice to them?
No, that's fascinating. I think probably 3 or 4 areas I've mentioned and going forward. I think to succeed, and I'm trying to do this at every stage of life, because we learn all the time. I try to surround yourself with people that know more than you do. So I always try to say, like, and that's been great, because even at Martin James Network, I'm meeting people that have sold and set up multi-million-pound businesses, have sold for 150 million pounds. These are, the more you can surround yourself by people that know more than you do, the better. So that's number one. So that networking, absolutely key. I think the world is going to fundamentally change, and the way we do business is going to change. And you hit the nail on the head, Joel, going forward. It's going to be far more about social values, goals. It's going to be far more about areas such as the environment and people than pure profit and making money. And I think one thing this lockdown and this whole period of time we've had is everybody's reflecting upon how we're going to grow out of this, the potential recession we're going to end up into. And that growth is going to come from innovation, but it's going to come from innovation that's based around environmental, looking after environment, because I think we've all seen actually the environment's had a few months to recover, and I think people like what they see, and I'm hoping that will carry on. But I think it's also going to have major impact. This year's had a fundamental impact in social values and social and communities. So I think about your business, but think about how when you drive that business forward, you'll take consideration some of those social goals that we've talked about today, because that's going to make that difference to you as well. Going forward, I think businesses, and that is a big change. It might not sound it, but trust me, from 2-3 years ago, where you've got pure VCs coming in on 5 times profit, bang, 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 to actually people are looking at much more. So I think, and that's going to make the UK, that's going to give us a USP. We're going to need USPs. We've got Brexit coming along. We've got this virus. We've got, we're spending, £1 billion a day. I was joking, actually, HS2, 100 billion. It sounds quite reasonable now, doesn't it? 100 billion. It was a lot of money at the time, but now it's just, But we've got these big projects coming on board. We've got the Commonwealth Games, which is going to be the eyes of the world on our region, specifically Birmingham, within just over a year's time. 300 million people are going to be tuning in across the world. It's a phenomenal opportunity there. So absolutely, I think, going forward, let's think about your business, think about social, think about the environment, think about disruption, and I'm a great believer in this. Just because someone's done it like that time and time again, does that mean you need to do it like that? I'm all for getting people. I think young people, I think about my lad, he's 13 now. When he was at junior school, his first school, very creative. We come up with all these crazy ideas, and it's great. And when we go to school, some of those ideas are sort of knocked out of us a bit. Oh no, you've got to do this, and this. And I could already see him double thinking his ideas. I say, no, don't do that. Keep a clean, keep a real open sheet of paper. Because it's when we want people to be disruptive. We want people to think about where we're going to be in 5, 10, 20 years time. And I heard this wonderful statistic that said, when my boy starts looking for a job, say in 5, 6 years time, 20 of the top 25 jobs don't exist yet. They don't know what they're going to be, because we're moving at such a pace. So, we've got to be disruptive. We've got to be innovative. We've got to think about doing things slightly differently, and not be scared to try stuff that fails, because you learn as much from failure as you will do from success. And I think the US, for its faults, when it comes to entrepreneurship, the US are very, almost see failure as quite a, has to happen.
Like a badge of honor, isn't it?
Yeah. And whereas in the UK, we've always seen as, that business failed. And I think we need to get over that pretty quickly, because we want to be entrepreneurial, but we've got to find our unique selling points as a country. And, and these are what's going to make us different. These are what's going to attract investment. Companies, I want companies to come to Birmingham because it's the best place to be for their business. They're going to get the best skill. It's the most innovative place. They're going to feel that it's an environment that they can build a business, they can scale a business, they can raise money, they can develop their ideas, they can try stuff into different audiences, and they can have the spotlight of the world on thinking, actually, I came to Birmingham to do that, and I chose Birmingham because it was the best place in the world to do it. And we can't apologize for that. That's what I want to see happen. So, and despite all these problems and all these terrible things we've had, there are little clusters where we have got that world-class lead, and we've just got to build on that.
Well, look, I couldn't end this conversation on a final point. So, no, far from it. I think, your point around surrounding yourself with the right people, sustainable innovation, social innovation on that score, but being disruptive with it. I think that's the key, being not afraid to be disruptive, because you can. And it's, Birmingham, the Midlands, the region, if we could all get together and have a real global narrative around those things, who knows what can happen. We can create our own normal together. So, Tim, I want to thank you very much for your wisdom, your input, your passion, your drive, and hope the participants on the call will share some of those messages continually after this call. And I look forward to hearing more from you in due course.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure talking to you.
So just in this kind of final 8 more minutes or so, I just wanted to see if there was any questions, any thoughts from anyone on the call. So David, John, have you had anything coming through?
We have had a question, yes. Both, thank you so much for that conversation and allowing us to participate. I'm really loving these sessions. It was the same for the first conversations with Entrepreneur. So inspiring. Thank you for letting us spectate. First question, talking of social inclusion, what steps do you think the tech industry can take, including in particular VR and AR, to encourage more women and people of colour into technical roles and into the sector generally? Yeah,
I think very valid point, and it is. I think in the tech industry, you look at my business, well, the business I set up, it was traditionally male in the programming side, and then we started to get. We were quite lucky that we had people interested from very different minorities, but in terms of gender, it was predominantly male, and it was predominantly because the applications were just coming in from males. And you look back, so I went to Staffordshire University where they do a big games degree course, and I went and spoke to the students there, 120 students, which 118 were male. So I suppose we've got to do more to attract women into tech generally, at school certain ages. So it's not seen to be a nerdy or quirky thing, that we can actually show people that what you're doing when you're building tech is you're building product, that you're making a difference, and I think, manufacturing's tried to do the same, and to some great successes as well, actually. So I think number one is, and it probably goes back to Joel's point as well. If you look at attracting people from different minorities as well, is it a community thing? Is it that actually, if you're honest about this, is it the kids that get the opportunity to actually start coding or start getting access to the sort of tech? It might be that they're actually from a slightly more privileged position, and that should we be looking to do more community projects that get, and this is where esports is a good example. Can you get young kids interested in tech at an early age, whether that's on a community based, whether that's even starting with sports and esports, because once you get the bug and you get the interest, then I've noticed kids, how do I build that? How do I do that? And then you've got that opportunity. And there's a school of coding, a company in Birmingham. You hear about what the guys are doing after school clubs now, and they're doing really well because teachers aren't qualified to teach coding because we haven't invested in that as a curriculum subject. So private sector are coming in and filling the gap. So there's a lot to do. It is starting to happen, but I think as a country, when you look at where our jobs of the future are going to be, undoubtedly they're going to be around tech. We've got to be thinking about making sure we widen it out so it's not just a small niche to get access to that.
Yeah, I mean, just to complement some of that, Tim, I think one thing I've seen from our experience of putting programs into communities and attracting all communities, we've found that it's about the language and the narrative and making sure you meet people where they are. You can't expect anyone, whether it's, you know, different race, gender, disability, etc., to come out of their own comfort and environment into a new space just because the resource is there for them. There has to be a commonality and a meeting of minds and a meeting of locations and a meeting of experience and environment with honest dialogue to see how things could be shaped to suit each other's needs. And that comes from that sense of relationship and that sense of connection. And I think one thing I've always loved about our region is that it's big, but it's a village. You know, you can virtually get to anyone in 4 or 5 connections, as long as you're adding value. You know, people want to add value and want to associate with those who are adding value, and they will help you if they can see you're genuinely wanting to do that. And that does mean in our communities as well, but we have to be willing to come out from that perspective. But I think there's so much opportunities for us at all. Any other questions before we close, David, at all?
There are, well, if I may slip in a question, it's a very practical one. I've been listening to VR, and I have listening to what you say about VR and AR, and I have some experience of the technologies, but I couldn't develop. Now, if I wanted to, I know what I'd do. I'd take my idea and I'd run off to somebody like you, Tim, and say, help, and how much. But you know, even if I have the technical capability to build a VR or AR solution on my own, how long should I bank on it taking? So, you know, if I'm looking at 2021, the way we're facing it at the moment, probably a lot of physical events are going to be cancelled. A virtual event or exhibition or whatever it is sounds very attractive. What's my lead time?
I think you've got 3 options there, actually. You know, number one is something like a virtual event. I wouldn't build it from scratch. There'll be people out there that already have platforms. As you would building it, just license what let somebody else take that investment, spend that, and then you just license and use that for yourself. So in terms of virtual exhibitions or virtual events, you know, your lead is a matter of weeks, because once you've bought that environment, you've just got to populate it. So that's one option. Second option is, if you're looking at low cost VR, you know, 360, and you look at what colleges, schools do everywhere, you can get a 360 camera. You can create your own 360 movie. You want one of those cameras like £500, and then before you know it, you've created your own VR experiences in 360. So you can start to do stuff yourself that doesn't need any coding background, because you can just do that. When it comes to actually coding a virtual reality piece of software, it's no different, I suppose, to another piece of software like a website. It's how long is a piece of string. You know, if it's a really complicated 3D environment, something like National Nuclear Laboratory wanting a replication of one of their halls completely, you could be looking at 3 to 6 months. You know, it could be a long piece of work and quite expensive. But equally, if it's a case of saying, actually, we're quite happy to go with, I think we were, I'm linked with, was asked to build a careers game for schools, and they wanted a virtual experience for the kids, and it was a mobile game where you slotted your phone into one of these VR headsets, and off you went. So really low cost. Headsets were £2 each, so the schools could buy them. They could put their phone in when they get home, and they could understand what it's like to look at different careers, because there isn't a career service anymore. It used to be, but now, you know, and they'd look at different careers opportunities and play it as a game. So if I want to do that career, I've got to go to university. So this is what I have to do to do that, to that. And that whole project, I think, was about 8 weeks. So, you know, that's 8 weeks. That includes build and testing and developing. But your price rise is really, you know, it is so right. It's from 20,000, 5,000 to 250,000. You know, it really depends on the complexity of what you're trying to do. But like I said, everybody, start small, start with a demo, start with a pilot, test the market, trial it, make sure that what you're developing is the right headset for the right market. And then when you've tested that and it works and you've got the confidence it's there, then you can start putting a bit more money in. But don't blow all your money just yet. Although we're always here, David, to take your call. Don't worry about that.
Very good news. I mean, next year we've got to get good at linking arms, haven't we? And VR and AR is potentially a way of doing that. We've talked about inclusion as one of our serious topics that we've touched on today, and this gives us a way in. And if we can find quick and cost-effective ways of going in without unnecessarily reinventing the wheel, so much the better for Midlands business. I need to hand over, but gentlemen, thank you so much. We'll bring the event to a close, but I think we could do another one very readily in about 20 minutes, couldn't we? It's a rich vein that we've opened. John, over to you for closing, and Tim and Joel, thank you once again very much indeed.
Welcome, no problem at all.
Thank you, David, and Tim, and Joel, of course. Now, please don't dash off. I'm only going to take a minute or two to wrap this, and there's no hard sell coming. In doing these events, what we really want to do is build a sense of community around entrepreneurship in the West Midlands, and that's it. So this is your event as much as it is ours. So to that end, please give us just a few seconds at the end to fill in the feedback form and tell us more about what you like, what you don't, what you want to see from these events in the future. On that note, please put a pencil in your diary. Our next event is going to be on the third Thursday again, Thursday, 21st January, probably 2 o'clock, but again, do tell us in the feedback form your preferred time and we'll follow the format that works for you. Next time, Entrepreneur in a Hot Seat is Mike Bruman, the CEO of Vanti. If you don't know them, Vanti is a company, again, based in the West Midlands, of course, making quite a reputation, award-winning reputation for designing tech into buildings. So we'll hear all about the growth journey of that company from the CEO. Again, he'll be expertly interviewed by Joel Blake. Thanks for agreeing to do that and joining us again. So we look forward to that, Joel. And we look forward to seeing you all again in January and wish you a very restful Christmas break. Thank you.